As we get closer to the 2025 NHL Trade Deadline, we have a new team that has entered full CL mode in the St. Louis Blues. After another stagnating season for the St. Louis Blues, they're in a pretty tough position. With all the trade chatter we're hearing, it seems like they might be one of the bigger sellers of this deadline. So that begs the question, how much will the Blues end up selling off from their current roster? Which players are most likely to get traded? Well, make sure you watch till the end as we go through all the trade rumors here today, and hit that subscribe button if you're new for more hockey content just like this, presented by BetUS. Now, when talking about this Blues franchise, it's pretty interesting because over the past couple of years, they've been stuck in that mediocre middle in the Western Conference, and even to this day, they're not completely out of the playoff race, which just shows how rough the middle of the Western Conference truly is. But they're only 4 points out of the playoff race, even though they played a couple of games more than the Canucks and the Flames. But I would say realistically, they're likely to miss the playoffs this year unless they catch fire out of nowhere. And I think this Blues franchise knows the stagnation, they see the on-ice product and just how underwhelming it's been, and it seems like, especially at this deadline, we might start to finally see them making some major changes. And that leads us on to Nick Kypreos and his latest trade board article talking about the St. Louis Blues and why the Blues are open for business. And the opening segment of this article gives us details on what the Blues are looking for this deadline, the direction that their franchise might be heading, starting off by saying, take the St. Louis Blues for example. I have 5 Blues players on this week's list, and they will be listening to even more as Doug Armstrong considers how to take a new approach with this team before handing over the reins to Steen in 2026. Now, it gets interesting after that because he says we should be clear about something, however, that this isn't a fire sale, quotes, for the Blues. They will look to move 1 or 2 of the big pieces they are listening to offers on in an effort to change the look and feel of the roster for next season. The only untouchable player is believed to be Robert Thomas. Now, we also get a name of the team that they're trying to mold after, and as they say, Armstrong is thinking about taking a similar approach to the Washington Capitals. I mean, who isn't at this point? Who did many teams a favor by showing that you don't have to go into a 5-year rebuild if things aren't going according to plan. The Capitals are a perfect example of a team that reshaped its roster and turned around a non-playoff team in decline to an Eastern Conference leading contender. If you make the right decisions, you can quickly turn around your fortunes. And this is something that we talked about a lot this year with the Capitals and their success, how I think teams might start gravitating towards retools and these very quick succession of moves to try to make a team makeup different. And honestly, I'm all for that because that just means more trades. But it seems like the Blues are going to be more in line with that Capital style where they're going to be prioritizing, especially in the next couple of years, youth, development, drafting, and then really trying to turn that over in a massive way, but not tearing it all down completely, which I think is an important thing to note. Because even though Nick Kypreos does state that the only untouchable is Robert Thomas, I also feel like there are a bunch of players on that team that St. Louis is going to prioritize in keeping. The first one is Dylan Holloway, who has been a wholesale success for this Blues franchise in so many ways. After offer sheeting him, he has broken out in a major way, going from a player who had 18 career points in the regular season to this year having 42 points, 17 goals in 59 games. He has been a revelation and somebody that they, quite frankly, need to keep. A part of that offer sheet as well is Philip Broberg, who is another major one, somebody that has also been a big revelation for the Blues and their defense especially. Even though he's had a little bit of health concerns this year, I don't think that's going to be much of a factor long term. You can see in 46 games, 18 points this year. He's been effective all around and is really actually becoming the defenseman that Edmonton thought he would be. And then I think you also have to include Jake Neighbors in that group. Even though I don't think he's on the level of a Holloway or a Broberg, he still is pretty solid and has pretty much carved in that goal scoring, intense physical role. He's somebody that in 59 games this year, 14 goals, 13 assists, 27 points. Even though I don't think he's going to be a first liner by any means, just a solid player all around and somebody that you always love to have. Now, obviously, the Blues are going to be replicating a Washington Capitals type of mold. They're going to be wanting to keep a lot of those younger players. The big question is, who do they trade and who is most likely to get dealt? Because we know some of the players on the block already, but who actually gets dealt will be interesting here. Now, we have a lot of players to talk about on the trade block here, but first I want to talk about today's sponsor in BetUS, the place to make your hockey picks all throughout this year, and whether it's on different NHL games and what we see with the over and unders there, the money line, you can also go for the Stanley Cup winners, as well as some different NHL specials. An interesting one that I saw as well was if Alex Ovechkin were to win his second Stanley Cup before retiring. That's at plus 600 right now. We were just talking about the Cap success and how they could be a big contender this year. We'll see how much Ovi is able to factor into that. But if you want to make your picks there, just use code YouTube150 when you sign up, and you'll get 150% setup bonus on your first deposit and 125% setup bonus on your next two deposits right after that. Now, getting us started here today with the players the Blues could be dealing, to me, the most likely player to get dealt at this deadline is Brayden Schenn, captain of the Blues, but considering the Ryan O'Reilly trade, considering letting Alex Pietrangelo go, they aren't afraid to have their captains go by the wayside. Now, in Brayden Schenn's case, him being 33 years old, it could be easy to see why the production has slipped. This year, he's on pace for 48 points, a slight uptick over what he had last season. But I think in Schenn's case, the value that comes from him is a lot to do with the goal scoring and the dual threat offense he provides, as well as just the hardworking nature that he's always brought to his game. I'm not sure how much defensive value there's going to be now, but he's somebody that I think with the leadership there and the intensity is somebody that a lot of teams would love to have. But there's one thing that I think really keeps a Brayden Schenn trade from happening. One thing that I think could be a massive problem as St. Louis looks to negotiate a lot of these trades, and that is the contracts that have been handed out, because, oh boy, Schenn has a lot left. If you were looking for Brayden Schenn to be a rental piece for your team like the Ryan O'Reilly trade was, then I have pretty bad news for you, because in Brayden Schenn's case, not only does he have a full no trade clause this season, which means he can determine wherever he goes, he also has 3 seasons left on his contract after this at $6.5 million, and then becoming a UFA in 2028. So it would be a pretty large commitment. For one, I think there would have to be some salary retention on the deal, especially for a lot of teams that would want to be in on Schenn. $6.5 million for that amount of time is, I think, a pretty hard pill to swallow, especially considering the age. Him turning 34 this August, he's not going to be getting any better, and you being rung up for that contract, I think, is going to turn some teams away. And that, to me, is kind of the big difference between the Blues and some of the teams like the Capitals that they're trying to replicate, and that is the deals that so many of these older pieces have on St. Louis. They were giving no trade clauses in St. Louis like they were freaking candy for so long there, and I think it will really make a problem here for the Blues trying to retool this team. Another player that has been in trade rumors that also has trade protection is Jordan Binnington. On the goaltending side, a massive force in net for the Blues for a long time now, especially after his brilliant final game versus the US at the Four Nations. He's getting a lot more attention than he otherwise would. Because if you look at his actual regular season statistics, it hasn't really been the greatest point, especially since 2020, where he really hasn't gotten much consistency. A 910 save percentage in 2021, then a 901, then an 894, then back to a 913, and then back this year down to an 899. I think for the Blues, that consistency has been a massive problem and a big reason why they haven't really been able to surpass expectations. For all intents and purposes, Binnington has been pretty average this season, but for a lot of teams out there that are looking to make a playoff push, they see what Binnington is capable of when things get ramped up, when the intensity is at its highest, and I can understand why there's value in a player like that. The good news, I think, in trading Binnington is that I think the contract is a little bit more manageable than Schenn's, making $6 million for the next 2 seasons afterwards, so not as much term, and when it comes to the actual trade protection, it was a lot harder to trade him before this season, before he had a full no trade clause. Now it's down to a modified no trade clause. He has an 18-team no trade list, which is still pretty massive, but I think there are going to be options there, since I would imagine in Binnington's case, a lot of the teams that he had off the trade list were teams that weren't going to be contenders anyways. Now, in terms of the teams that could be interested in Binnington, Nick Kypreos has a few teams here. Edmonton, Carolina, and Detroit have interested in him. Edmonton, for example, would be fascinating. I mean, I'm not the biggest Binnington guy, but I think anything at this point is an upgrade over Stuart frickin' Skinner. Now, Nick Kypreos also mentions Colton Parayko on the defensive side as an option, and it's funny because I feel like we've been talking about Parayko for 5 years now in the trade block, but as Kypreos mentions, a few weeks ago, Parayko was deemed untouchable by Armstrong. Since then, he's hung up the sign that he's open for business, and that includes the potential of trading his top defense for the deal is right. Now, kind of like Binnington, I think we might see a Four Nations stock rise from Parayko. Not quite at the same level, because I don't think Parayko was all that great at the Four Nations, but because he was there, because he was a part of that winning team, he's going to be getting a lot more attention. And hey, I'll give Parayko this. There's one thing you can't really take away from them, and that is the goal scoring, especially this season. 58 games, he has 13 goals, which is already a career high for him, and 32 points. The offense has been bumping quite a bit, and even though I don't think I'm the biggest fan of Parayko and some of the defensive style that he has sometimes, you can't deny just the production that he's had this year and how much that's been improved over seasons in the past. So for a team that's looking for a big defenseman, somebody that can have a booming shot from the point, could work as well shorthanded, there's a lot of value that you could still get out of Parayko, and that's always been true. The problem, again, that feels like it's a problem with almost every single other Blues defenseman that they're trying to trade, is that contract. He makes $6.5 million for the next 5 seasons after this, Plus, he has a full no trade clause right now. So any deal that would come to happen, Parayko would have to say yes to it. But I think Parayko is one of the players most likely to accept a deal, especially in his case. He's won a Stanley Cup, but I think for him, he wants to play on a much more competitive team and a much more solidified roster, which St. Louis just hasn't been. Even though I think in the past, Parayko has kind of been more of the problem for that Blues team, now I think you can really make the case that he's somebody that could really thrive somewhere else. Especially when you compare the ages from Schenn to Parayko, 33 to 31 years old, you can make the case that Parayko has a lot more left in the gas tank. And for a lot of GMs out there, a 6'6" right-handed shot that has a booming shot from the point, a lot of teams are going to be interested, naturally. Another big one that got mentioned here was Pavel Buchnevich on the forward side of things, and this one is interesting considering the Blues just signed him to a contract extension, a 6-year extension that takes him at $8 million AAV. That, to me, is why I think Buchnevich is a little bit less likely than the players we just talked about, but he's somebody that the Blues, I feel like, have always kind of been up and down on. Even though he had a great start to his career there, the production and the health has kind of always been in question. Now, to be fair to Buchnevich, he's on pace for back-to-back 80-plus game seasons, but you can make the case that maybe being injured was better for his point production, considering he hasn't gotten back, hasn't gotten more than 65 points since he played 63 games back in 2023. It'll be interesting to see how the Blues develop this, because even though they signed him to that extension, the results so far have been pretty mild, and I could see St. Louis giving Buchnevich a change of scenery, which at this point, he might be wanting. Now, to me, an offseason trade is a lot more likely to happen for Buchnevich, considering that high cap hit coming up at $8 million. I think teams are a lot more likely to bring on a big cap hit like that when their cap structure is a lot more freed up. We'll see. There is still the chance that this deadline is where it happens, but I don't know. I think more likely he ends up staying with St. Louis and is part of the solution rather than who they deal. Now, the most fascinating Blue on this list is easily Jordan Kyrou, who's kind of had some big ups and downs with his tenure in St. Louis. As Nick Kibrio states, Kyrou does not have any trade protection attached to his contract for now, but a full no trade clause is introduced in July and will run through the next 5 years of the deal, which comes at $8.1 million. As he says, he and Robert Thomas still make more than any other Blue, but as the team struggles to take a leap forward, Armstrong is having to consider changing over the core group. Kyrou is still highly valued and on track to finish with his third straight 30-goal season and a similar point total to what he finished in 2024. He'll be 27 in May and in the prime years of his career. Now, do I think it's likely that the Blues trade Kyrou? Absolutely not, but I feel like he's a player that, especially over the last couple of years, even though the point production has still been great, he's kind of been a player that I think St. Louis has wanted more from, especially in the overall game. I think especially in 2023, he was somebody that the defensive game really was showing some massive problems, even if the goal scoring was really rising to the occasion. He's somebody that has been a great goal scorer, a great offensive player for a while now, but I think for St. Louis, with them trying to find their identity, with them being more of a physical team, Kyrou was kind of laughing at the face of that in the more offensive, pure speed type of presence. It'll be interesting to see what St. Louis wants to become with this retool, what they really want to prioritize. If they do want to go in a more skillful direction, I think Kyrou is somebody you absolutely have to keep. The skill set there and the way he's able to read the game is just so fascinating, the way he's able to do it in concession. And I think in Kyrou's case, he's somebody that I would keep personally, considering the age and how I think he can get better overall and over time. And even though his production has slipped every year since 2022, he's somebody that is still on pace for 65 points this year, 33 goals, and still has had that goal scoring pedigree pretty consistently all throughout the last few years. We'll see how much that's a factor for St. Louis, how much they want to keep him, but to me, he's a keep. But if they are going to want to deal him, if they do even have the conversations there, it has to be this deadline, because as Nick Kibrio said, that trade protection is going to be kicking here very soon, this summer. So there might not be the potential of a draft trade in the first place. If they want to deal Kyrou, it has to be now. As for the players I think the Blues will end up keeping, I think Robert Thomas, Jordan Kyrou, and Pavel Buchnevich will stay as St. Louis Blues. On the flip side, though, I think Brayden Schenn, even with the contract complications, is the most likely guy to get dealt, as well as Jordan Binnington and then Colton Parayko right behind him. I would say, though, Schenn and Binnington, if it's just two guys that St. Louis deals at the top end of their team, it would be those two guys, though I could see a few other depth players like Matthew Joseph or Alexei Toropchenko also being guys at St. Louis shops. But I would love to know your thoughts down below on this St. Louis Blues team and this retool they might be finding themselves in. I would love to know your thoughts down below on who you guys think the Blues should trade, who you think they will trade, and if you're a part of this Blues franchise, where you would ship these players, who you would deal. Let me know what you guys think of the Blues and what you would do with their team going forward. And of course, make sure that like button, hit that subscribe button, and hit that notification bell if you haven't already to support the channel and get more videos just like this in the future. And share the video with all the hockey fans you guys know online, and click on this card for all my traded content right in one playlist. And I'll see you in the next one. Yeah, make sure you sign up as well to BetUS using code YouTube150 and drink some water for me. Have a great one, y'all, and goodbye.